I'm Chad Ruthermond.
And I'm Andy Kinnick.
And we're joined today by Dan Otten.
Hello.
And Janelle Vickers.
Hi.
So, welcome to NOCLIP Pocket. NOCLIP printer sold separately. Today, we're going to be talking about...
That was definitely worth it.
That was it? I've got like a list of them. That was like the one that I liked for this one, because we're not talking about a Game Boy game. We're in fact talking about Home, a game that was released in 2012 on PC, and it was developed by Ben Rivers.
Incorporated.
Yeah.
LLC.
Delaware Limited Liability Company. So Home is essentially an adventure game, but it's one where there's very little in terms of puzzle solving or, you know, the traditional narrative content that you find in an adventure game, which is kind of why we found it interesting in the first place.
Yeah, it's very much like an atmospheric piece, and I feel like that's why it stuck with me anyway. I played this for the first time probably like 3 or 4 years ago now at this point.
It's been a while.
Yeah.
You actually probably played it pretty close to release, if I had to guess, because I don't remember when I got it, but I showed it to a lot of people. But the reason that I did that is the game's really short, and the gimmick of it is that each time that you play the game, depending on what you interact with and what choices you decide to make, though really it's the interacting with stuff that makes the biggest difference, it kind of determines the outcome of your story. And so I'd kind of like to start by saying, Dan and Janelle, what was the story of your first playthrough?
Hotgarbo.
It was Garbo. That was my last note on the game, was our ending was Garbo.
Yeah, so basically my thought going in was I wanted to try to interact with as many things as possible and try to basically get as much of the story going in. And when it finally came to sort of the climactic moment of the game where you, as the protagonist, find out whether or not your wife is dead, I made the choice, thinking it would be more psychologically interesting to say that the protagonist had invented his wife all along. I thought that would lead to a more interesting choice than just finding her corpse in the basement and assuming that I was actually a mass murderer. But it ended up being really unfulfilling, and I don't know whether I missed items or I missed part of the game, but the game essentially ended with the protagonist saying, well, I don't really know what happened.
Our ending was basically like, know all these like clues and like little tidbits that you've been finding throughout the game. Who knows what they mean?
Yeah, apparently I just went into like an alcoholic sleepwalking state and some stuff happened. What happened to my buddy Norman? Was he actually sleeping with a woman named Rachel? Because I made up Rachel apparently. Then who was he sleeping with? Who killed Norman? Beats me, I'm just gonna leave the house.
Yeah. To my knowledge anyway, I don't think you missed anything. It's just the game really seems to lean into the idea that you are the murderer, because that ends up with the more satisfying ending if you do find her body in the basement, because there's evidence to support you being the murderer. And I agree, the idea that, because it's so obvious going through that that's what happened, that not being the case would be more interesting, but the game doesn't support that option basically at all.
I would have rather it shoehorned you into the ending that it seems to suggest it wants you to have, of you finding out you were the murderer all along, as compared to having an option for something else that ended up being that sort of dissatisfying.
Well, I don't think it needs to like shoehorn you into that ending. I think like it wouldn't take that much creativity to make that ending more satisfying than it was, because it really, like, it was hardly an ending. I mean, it was just Rachel wasn't real. I don't, like, and then the character, like, throws up their hands about every other mystery that we came across in the game. It was like, what was Norman doing there? Like, what was all this stuff about? I don't know. But I sure am bummed that Rachel wasn't real. And then the credits roll.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chad, but at the end, if you make the choice not to leave, do you just keep playing the game, or does that trigger a different ending?
There are two ways to end the game proper, and you had access to both of them in this case. The first one is to leave the house, And if you choose not to leave the house, then you can go, I believe, to the bathroom. And while you're in the bathroom, you can kill yourself with a knife.
That's what I figured.
I think you can also kill yourself with the gun if you have it as
don't
well.
put it back.
The only time that you can't kill yourself, this game very uplifting. The only time you can't kill yourself is if you choose not to take the gun or the knife. So,
Do you remember what ending I was on track to get? However long ago was I? tried
I've
to play
watched
through
this.
game?
Like people play this game so many times that I don't know.
I think that you were on track to get the ending I wish I had gotten, because I went through the game and got to Rachel's body and said that I did find it, but then when I went to leave the house, I assumed I just had to leave the house or just kind of like walk around the house forever.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you were on track to have found her body and then stay and kill yourself, and I wanted to see what that ending was.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah.
So what happened when you left the house after finding the body?
Wow, it's really hard to remember.
Did you
get
get
like
arrested?
a text dump of? I think
So-
you just kind of like. I found the body and then left, and I think he just kind of like. It's implied that he just kind of like runs away and becomes a drifter. But I don't remember.
It depends.
It's been like 4 years.
Yeah, it depends on some things. And I by no means have an encyclopedic knowledge of all the endings of this game. And also, not to give the game too much credit, I'm sure there aren't, like, a ludicrous number of endings. There's just several. And the text will be a little bit different on each one, so it allows for more sort of modularity. However, the majority of people, and what the game kind of does, is on everyone's first playthrough, they always want to sort of like see everything, grab everything, take everything with them. And the game plays into that in order to deliver what I think is its intended narrative, which is that you killed Norman and your wife because you found that they were having an affair. So, and then like you can play that in a way where Rachel is not there and still works like she just went on vacation, because like there's plenty to set that up. But for the most part, that's generally what people get. I forget the question that led into all of this, but basically when you left the house, I believe you were like the on-the-run ending, where you were the murderer and potentially were the murderer of all of the people and had your crazy person notebook and everything.
Yeah, while I was playing through it, that was what seemed like it was definitely the case to me, so I just kind of leaned into that. I was like, yep, her body's here.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, and I think that's why, since I grabbed everything, like you said, it being my first playthrough, I definitely leaned into the idea of, I want to see everything, I want to get everything, I want to find as much information as possible, and I think that's largely why the ending that I got was such a letdown, because I was really looking for the twist, where all this information that I found leading me to believe that I was this mass murderer, largely of women, who I then buried in shallow graves in the woods, was somehow not that. I was really looking to see that flipped and see, that, oh, maybe it was somebody else all along, or I was, in some kind of a strange fugue state. I don't know. Anything other than the, dissatisfying ending that I got. So I think maybe that's why there was more dissonance for me, is I had all that information, and I was really looking for a way to piece all that information together in a way that wasn't just, I was the murderer all along.
Sure. And to, to complete the circuit of everyone, my first ending was exactly the same as yours, except I killed myself, so.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
So even in the ending where it turns out that you're the murderer, or maybe in any of the endings, one thing I was thinking about, or trying to pay attention to while you were playing through, was how much the details you get, especially early on, tie into the ultimate ending of the game. Does it hang together as a coherent narrative? And if you killed Rachel and Norman because they were having an affair, is it just a weird, a coincidence you also happen to be a serial killer? Right? Because, so much of the evidence you find early on suggests, a long-running pattern of killing, and you find several people.
Right. I think the read on that I got was this was one, rage-fueled, sleepwalking murder fest that, you killed Norman and Rachel, and then just proceeded to keep on, killing
then
a
why
bunch of
do you-
people, and you ended up in that house that you start the game in. And
Why do
then-
you have that notebook with all the names, and some of them are crossed out in like really old ink? Like that definitely
Okay, yeah.
suggests-
So
that's fair.
This is the thing, though. The text of the game itself, like if you're looking at it as a like holistic piece, is changing. So you don't have to find that notebook. You don't have to find the bodies. So with the exception of the guy in the first room and Norman, you wouldn't have to find any other bodies. Or you can find Rachel and to put the narrative
Right.
together. But yeah, so you actually, there would be no evidence of a mass murder spree. It would just be a story about you killing 2, possibly 3 people.
Yeah.
That's possible, but that's part of what my point was. Like, you can find all that stuff and then get the ending where it turns out Rachel was having an affair and you killed her and Norman, right?
I believe that I think you can, but with the implication that it brings in the sleepwalking angle, whereas if you don't find that stuff, you can get that ending where you've just killed them.
Okay.
Like, there are, like, multiple endings for the same.
And
Scenario.
is it possible that you just killed Norman and Rachel and then you kind of throw up your hands with the other murders? It's like, wow, I don't know what was going on at the plant
I
in the
was
water
the
tower.
murderer, and there's also another serial killer. Would also be kind of interesting, but once again, there's not very much evidence to
Yeah.
point that way.
There's also, if you don't pick up the wallet, credit card, driver's license, or watch, it also calls into question your own identity.
Yeah, whether or not you're Norman.
Right, like, it has a bunch of, like, you could be Norman, or you could be just, like, a drunk hobo that's just on a murder spree.
That's one of my favorite things about the game, is how what things you find and interact with changes the narrative, like, on a grander scale. Like we've said, if you don't find any of the bodies, then there's no evidence to point to you being a serial killer, so you just aren't in that version of the story.
Right.
But if you find all that stuff, then you probably are.
I would be interested to see what a speedrun style version.
I believe we actually did this once. I don't know if
I
you
think
were
he
there.
told me that Matt Artemis did this.
Yeah. He went through the game just, like, not picking up anything, only doing the things that are... And the ending was predictably unsatisfying. Like, you got to the end, he chose not to find Rachel and not to... He didn't have the
that
stuff
seems
to
like
kill
the
himself.
worst possible ending.
Yeah, so it was just like... Because there was still some implication about, like, why did I wake up there? What did I do? And things like that, but there was just nothing to go on, so... I forget if that would have been something if that had happened sometime more recently than like 5 years ago. I would love to have related what the game did in that scenario, but I don't remember.
2 things. I don't know if you're going to have the answers to this or not. Do you remember what was on the VHS tape? Because you find the VHS tape in the sewer, and you can find a VCR.
Yeah,
to
I
watch
figured because
it
it kept reminding me, like, oh boy, I have this VCR tape in my inventory. Sure wish I could watch that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I would love to watch that.
The
Where do I
locked
do
door
it?
and then the key in the security guard's pocket is how you get there. Not the guy who's outside. The guy who's in the bottom of the tunnel.
Right.
You find a key and then you can go, and then you can go back and find his.
And I also don't know what's in the safe, because I feel like I've seen a couple people play, and we've never gotten the safe open.
Yeah, that's
'Cause-
one that I cannot actually tell you.
Yeah, because Dan was playing,
It's a mystery.
and
You're not allowed to.
he didn't get to finish the game because he got to the safe, and we looked at the combination, because I don't know how you get it in the game, and we put it in, and then like the game just like froze.
You're not supposed
So-
to know.
Yeah,
Trade
yeah.
secrets.
Maybe that's just the way the game's made. You can't open the safe.
Yeah.
It's the VHS tape shows the guard whose key you grab to get into the room to watch the tape being murdered.
Okay.
By who?
It doesn't say
A
it was
shadowy
blurry.
figure.
Like, and it's also security camera footage, so like
Mm-hmm.
infamously in narratives difficult to make out. Though in real life, actually pretty reliable.
Right, yeah. Of course. But it is a VHS tape, so probably bad quality.
Right.
So this shifts the topic slightly from like the plot and story elements of the game.
I'm fine with that.
But you mentioned at the beginning this is sort of like an adventure game. I'm curious what does the game present itself as? Like, what are the tags if you go on Steam? And like, what genre do you think this game is in?
It says like a unique horror.
Exactly.
adventure
That's
on
why I
the Steam
asked, because
page.
I don't really think this is a horror game. It's not very effective as a horror game.
When we booted up the game, it said it was tagged with horror, and I jokingly asked Chad, like, "Oh no, am I gonna be scared?" And he said, no."
Yeah, it turns out
So
hard no.
I mean, I guess there were moments that startled me because if it is dark and you turn up the volume as they ask, sometimes sound effects can make you jump. But I wouldn't say that I was alarmed by anything, and I mean, perhaps it's in the 2D pixelated nature of the game, but it wasn't particularly like graphic. Like there wasn't a whole lot of body horror either.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't designate it personally as a horror game.
And it's not like Franbo, which is sort of similar. It like in terms of being like a 2D kind of adventure game setup, but there's like really disturbing imagery in that game. Whereas here, like it actually spares you, even when it has opportunities to do something kind of disturbing, it doesn't really capitalize on it.
Yeah, for me, like I said earlier, I think the game's very atmospheric, and it maybe has less of a horror vibe and more of like kind of a mystery vibe. There's always there's a sense of uneasiness to it, I think, and I think it's definitely enhanced if you play it like by yourself or at night. Because I know I played it at your place, but we didn't talk during really, and it was dark, and I think that made it better for me.
I don't think that you could say that this game isn't classified as horror. I feel like that's very clearly sort of what they're going for. But the reason that it isn't scary is many-fold. One is the pixel art graphics. Two is the choice that we've made to play it as a group in this scenario. Playing it by yourself, headphones on, lights off, that kind of thing, you're going to get a little bit, just because of like the lack of sound effects, or lack of music rather, and sort of the really isolated tone, I think is all fine. But I don't think it's intending to be like horrific. Like you can't really scare people in a group anyway without that sort of like visual aspect to it, and this game is actually incapable of doing that.
Yeah, and I don't know if you couldn't really classify this as like a point and click horror game really, but I think it does share that DNA. So I think I would classify it as like an atmospheric adventure game personally, to answer your question.
On that note though, sort of the aesthetics of this game are something that I find kind of like incredibly hit and miss. Like it was made by one person, so like the limitations are pretty clear. But both in visuals and sound, it seems like it took the unideal, the non-ideal, not the ideal,
anti-ideal,
like choice for both. The sound effects I'd give most of a pass for, because I think that they sound like either somebody was trying to make sound effects for their game and are not a sound engineer, or they pulled some of them from like a resource.
Library.
Yeah. So like whatever with that, I do have a special shout out for the cool power turning on sound effects.
I actually kind of disagree. One of my notes was that the sound design was like one of the big strengths of this game. I mean, maybe like on a really like technical level, it's not good. I actually wouldn't know because I don't have the knowledge to judge that. But I thought conceptually what they did with the sound design was really good, because all of you mentioned before, there's no real like music. Mm-hmm. And all of the sound effects are like just a little bit too loud, and I actually think that contributes to it feeling kind of unsettling when you're playing, especially early on. And that I think is one of the biggest like elements in the game that sets the atmosphere that like is what makes it effective, is like an atmospheric like horror mystery.
No, yeah, I would agree. It adds to that isolation feeling, I think, a lot, because like at least when I played, I was like anticipating like actually running into another person the whole time, and you never end up doing so. And I think
only
the sound
dead bodies.
Yeah, only dead people. But I think that the sound effects really add to that. Like you're going walking around in mostly silence, and then you hear those like sounds of the doors opening and the walking down the stairs that kind of like punctuate the silence.
It almost makes you, this is a little bit of an overstatement, but it almost makes you like dread interacting with things, or like you're reluctant to do it because even like turning a valve is somewhat unsettling because the sound is like just a little too loud. and especially opening the gates in the area immediately outside the house. I thought
with the
like
creaky,
that creak. Like every time you go through, it's like you're cringing in a way that I actually think is like
it's almost
is good.
like you're anticipating like the sound effect and then something happening, and then it never does. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I will say that with the 2D style, it actually made exploring the space a lot easier, and I felt like for a game that is supposed to be a little bit shorter, it was good to know I wasn't missing things in a three-dimensional space. So, like, I knew if there was an item on the screen, there wouldn't be anything above it. So, like, I didn't have to worry about shining the light up there. Or, you know, if I moved into another area, like, you know, things were highlighted very clearly. So I think that worked really well. Where I thought the 2D didn't work as well was the part in the woods with the bushes.
Yeah.
I was like, what is this?
The level design was very
Yes.
intuitive there.
I would agree. Yeah, it's more of a level design thing than an aesthetics thing.
Sure.
Because I think it's pretty clear that there's like a hole in the bush there that you can crawl through.
I didn't see it at first. Because
Oh, really?
I saw the negative space as being an object, because for the entire game, it highlights an object. And it was highlighting the hole in the bush, but I was like, what is this? Is this like a burnt out stump? What is that? So, you know, that was a little unintuitive. But I think
Is
that
it
there
two
were...
old women facing each other or a chalice?
I mean, but for real. So yeah,
two
like
bushes or a stump.
so like
Who
interacting, interacting with objects in a two-dimensional space worked, but interacting with, you know, like I said, like the absence of objects, which could matter in this game. In this case, the gap between the bushes, that was a little bit unintuitive. But I mean, I think for being like a side-scrolling, like adventure story, like it worked really well.
Yeah, for being a game that's made by one person, who I'm assuming is more of a programmer and less of an artist, I think the game is like, it has its weak spots where, like, you said the ladder looked like a bench to you.
Yeah.
And it really
I was like,
does.
oh god. I was like, oh god, where am I going? I thought this was a bench.
Yeah, and you know, that's fair. There are moments like that. But I think overall the game actually has a pretty, like, nice look to it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, okay, so when I said that it had a not ideal aesthetic design, it was not in reference to its functionality, because I do think that both of the things work well enough as... I'm saying that I think that if the game was going for a horror atmosphere, I don't think that the pixel art really helps it very much. Like, it is perfectly serviceable, and in a lot of places I actually really like the way that this game looks. The higher fidelity really just would have aided in being able to show things that were a little bit more graphic and make it a little bit more effective.
Well, you know, I was just gonna say, when we came across, for example, the bodies, I was like, oh, what's this in the ground?
Right,
and then
yeah.
it was like two girls. One of them is facing up. My flashlight, you know, hits their glassy eyes, and like it's very evocatively written. But I was like, oh, I didn't get that at all. Thought it was some rags.
I kind of like that though. I like the very detailed description and the more abstract visual. Because, like, and this is one of the points that I wanted to make about the game, is there are a lot of indie games that are made with pixel art aesthetics, and it's mostly as a nostalgia thing, or because, like, an engine like Game Maker has a pixel editor built in, so it's easier. But this game really feels like it could have, like, authentically been on the Super Nintendo.
Right.
Like, this game feels like old school, like, legitimately. And... so I think things like that come off better to me, like when I played it and when I watch other people play it, is that there's this something that feels really genuine, or maybe not genuine, but like very authentic to it in that way. What
was the horror game that we played where you, the protagonist was like the insurance adjuster for a fire insurance company? Yes, it was one word. And it was like a word, distraint.
Distraint. I wanted to say disjoint because I've been watching a lot of Super Smash Brothers content recently.
That game was pixel art too, right?
No.
Oh, the one that we played where there was the puzzles where you had to take the mushrooms and run through the hallway. Or is that a different game?
I'm pretty sure that's the same game.
This is great content.
It really is.
Speculating about a game that we've...
that's definitely pixel art, yeah.
Yeah, I only mention it because my memory is that game was actually pretty scary and, like, kind of disturbing and had, like, disturbing imagery, and it was pixel art. So, I think you can do that effectively in, like, the pixel art space.
Yeah, well, that was more detailed pixel art, whereas this is more, like, lower fidelity.
I appreciate that the character had a limp. They established throughout the game that you hurt your leg, and he limps the entire time.
Yeah, I have to wonder if that was intentional the whole time, or if he tried to make a walk animation and thought that it looked like he had a limp, so he wrote that into the story.
It doesn't ever really come into play, so...
No,
Other than, like, I don't want to come down this ladder, it could hurt my leg.
If you jump down the ladder and jump down the ventilation chute, I think that, like, your character said that he, like, has severely injured his leg, and then, like, that affects the ending in some way.
Huh. Maybe he can't leave the house.
I like that they keep bringing it up, because, it's just one more thing you have to keep in your mind, you know? I just think it adds to kind of, like...
Yeah.
Piling on, like, kind of, like, stress.
Yeah, what kind of sucks is that you want to play this game multiple times in order to get its, like, myriad endings. However, the first time that you play this game is always sort of, like, the best because you don't know what you're expecting. And so things like the limp, you're like, do I need to keep this in mind? Like, should I take the knife with me just in case there's, like, an enemy? Like, things like that, which are very... Like, this game... plays you just straight up. Like, it wants you to think that it's going to be more of a regular game than it is so that it can blindside you at the end.
I took the knife and the gun because I was like, well, who knows? I may need to fight some people. And then I was like, oh, but then if the police find me with these things, like, then they'll catch me. And so I was like, well, shit. Like, I guess it's, you know, like, I don't know what to expect. So I took everything.
But speaking of things being written into the story, I think this game is actually very well written for the most part. Like, as far as, like, we've discussed the plot itself and the way that the narrative strings together, but I think that the descriptions of items and, like, the moment-to-moment writing that shows up frequently to offer you, like, choices and provide descriptions of things is detailed and evocative enough to sort of pull you in to the world that the game is trying to set up. I don't know if anybody disagree with that.
Yeah, I wouldn't push back
I mean,
on that at all. I think the writing is one of the game's strengths for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, we kind of talked about, a lot of the puzzles were really simplistic. But it never felt like, oh, Jesus, I gotta turn these valves because I guess the game wants me to turn the valves. Like, I actually felt invested in, like, oh, like, I know how to do this. And, like, I need to do this because I need to keep going. And, like, ew, I don't want to be in that, you know, gross water. I gotta turn these valves for that reason. Like, I never felt, like, resentful toward the game, which I think is kind of common in adventure games like this that maybe are made by one person or a small team of people, and it's not, you know, you don't necessarily get invested in the story. So I think a lot of that, like with the writing and sort of bringing you into that narrative where you have an understanding of you want this character to get home, so you will do these, like, silly little puzzles, like, willingly, without sort of that feeling of, oh, I guess I'm getting shoehorned into this.
Right. As a minor point on the level design, I think that it actually is pretty strong in the sewers part of the game, because I think that the reason they make you turn the valves more than one time is so that you don't do it the first time. So you have to backtrack and come back through places to see if you can, like, pick up and check a few more things. Like, I think the game kind of wants to shepherd you along.
Yeah, I think in the first area there were more things I could have done or picked up, or, like, rooms that I missed.
Yeah, in the house, I think there were a couple of
Yeah,
rooms
there were a
you
couple
missed.
rooms I missed. But even still, I mean, I guess that is a strength of the game where you could pick up those ancillary items and it would add to the richness of the story, but you can always progress through. And there also were always, or not always, but frequently, these sort of, like, level skipping things. So you could, if you pickpocketed the guard, get his card that gave you the access to the room where you could bypass the need for turning all the power switches on.
Right.
You know, so you could go through and play the level in its entirety, or you could kind of find these ways to circumvent. So I thought that was interesting as well. If you're kind of a completionist like me, you could go through and try to find every item and do every puzzle, but if you're someone who's trying to just speed run through things, and I think that is an avenue that works as well. If you're the character who's anxious to get home, who wants to know what's going on with his wife, why he woke up in a strange place, like, you might take the avenues where you can cut as many corners as possible to get home.
Yeah, and while we're on the subject of the puzzles, I feel like I agree that they never feel like they're tedious because they are very like stripped down and streamlined, but I kind of feel like they're almost too much to the point where they don't really even feel like puzzles.
Right.
And not that there's anything really wrong with that. It kind of feels like it's an idea that the game had that it just kind of abandons because there's only like 2 instances of it.
It
So
could
ends
also
up-
be an example of our favorite thing in the world, which is needless time padding to try and make the game a little bit longer
Yeah,
so
it
people
just-
don't feel cheated.
If they could have had something a little bit more involved, I think it might have gone over a little bit better. But it's
Yeah.
not really a big deal.
I agree with that. I mean, it's almost a stretch to call them puzzles. Like, there's no real. You don't have to think them through. It's just whether you find the things you need to interact with. And now I kind of feel 2 ways about the water valve thing because I made a note like that was really unintuitive and not fun. Like it was a part of the game where I felt like it dragged.
Right.
But it's actually a good point that it does force you to backtrack at a time in the game when like maybe you haven't been doing that. So if that was the intent, that is pretty effective. As a puzzle, it's not. I think it's not very good.
Well, I mean, it's like I said, they aren't really truly puzzles. It's more
Yeah.
of, but like I said, I think because of the writing and because of the plot and the fact that it makes you identify with this character that you have no idea about, who really doesn't even know himself, to the degree that you will go and do these little repetitive things in order to move forward. I think does say a lot that a lot of those simple puzzle type games don't always have.
But what's unintuitive about the water valve puzzle, and actually the power one, although once you get to the power one, you've learned this, is like the text is almost actively tricking you because it says like, I think I can turn off the water if I turn the valve. Did I turn it? And then you hit yes, and you hear a turning noise. And then unless you interact with it again, you don't find out, oh, it didn't work. Do I turn it again?
Yeah,
I mean,
because
like,
I went
you
down
get
to
no
the water.
visual cue that
Yeah.
it didn't
Well,
work.
you get an audio cue though. Is that there are at least 2 of them where you turn them and you get a different sound effect, like a
Yeah.
Yeah.
and then the game I think wants you to realize when you turn the other ones, it just goes
Right.
and like to
Can we
notice
get that one again, please?
to notice that there's like a difference.
Let's sound what a clown's nose make if you honked it.
that.
Oh, okay. Very slightly different.
Yeah, but like, I think the game wants you to pick up on that there's like a turning off sound and a turning sound.
Yeah, but I totally didn't. And so I went down to the water and I was like, why is there still water here?
No,
I found
no.
all 4 valves.
I also
I
think that
agree
there's
it's still a little confusing.
There's like a running water sound effect that we couldn't hear because the AC was on also. So there's a few, but I still did exactly the same thing the first time I played it, and most people seem to.
And I think the game does want that. But while we're on the subject of the mechanics and everything, what do you think of the hold flashlight up and hold flashlight down mechanic?
I love it personally.
See, I think it's kind of like the puzzles for me, where I kind of like it conceptually, but I feel like they don't do it enough.
That's fair.
Yeah,
I agree with that. I mean,
Yeah.
it's sort of counterintuitive, and you don't have to do it often enough that like you mostly forget about it.
Yeah,
I mean,
'cause-
I could tell that like that Janelle playing through the game there would be rooms where like she would remember that you can hold the flashlight up and do it frequently, and then other times when like
I mean, but
she
also
hadn't done it in a long time.
But also because I was using a Steam controller, and every once in a while, the Steam controller thinks I want to go up, and I
Right.
don't. So, like, 4 times in one room, it would be like, whoop, put that flashlight in the air!
In fairness to Valve, that is a problem with my Steam controller specifically. I've accidentally disconnected the back of the directional pad, and sometimes it doesn't register properly.
Yeah, so, like, every once in a while, I'd be like, let's check the ceiling! And I'm like, I didn't want to do that, but you know what?
Now,
Do your thing.
Yeah, it feels like there's like every time there's a spot where you need to use it, you're wandering around for a while before you realize, oh yeah, I can do this.
Right.
And then you figure it out. So, I don't know. I feel like they were kind of trying to balance it to where it would be like an epiphany moment, like, oh yeah, I have to look up and find the thing. But
I think the purpose that it serves, as far as like the game itself goes, is more that if you're going just from point A to point B throughout the entire game, anything that's on the ground or the walls, you're just going to see because they highlight it. And so putting things up out of reach makes it so that there's still things that can be hidden that you have to look for.
Right.
Which helps because this game, keeps track of the things that you interact with. Mm-hmm. So putting things above you is a way to allow people on their first playthrough not just to hit every single thing. I don't know. It just adds a little bit of variance.
Right.
That's why I like it.
No, I agree. I like it overall. I just feel like it probably could have been implemented better.
I also like that the flashlight narrows your field of view, so that really the only thing that you can see in certain areas is just like a few feet around you. Yeah.
When I got to the house and I was in the basement the first time before I had to go get the crowbar to smash down the wall.
Right.
When I got to the basement, I'm like, she's gonna be down here, dead. And then, I was like, ooh, inching along with that little flashlight being the only thing you could see. And I was very disappointed when I got to the back wall and there was no dead body. But, there were moments like that.
Yeah, maybe my favorite, single moment in the game actually was because of the way that worked visually. When you're in the house at the beginning of the game and you go into the room and take a step to your left and see the skeleton behind the wall.
Yeah.
That's a really neat scene, and it's really one of the only times in the game where you're seeing something that the character presumably doesn't know is there, that is meaningful in some way. Mm-hmm. But it's super cool because it's really early in the game. You're coming across all these things that suggest that something nefarious is going on, and then you see the skeleton, and it's confirmation that something really bad is happening, and the character doesn't know about it.
Right. And we actually talked about this on the Metroid Fusion episode. Very early in that game, there's a wall that presumably Samus cannot see behind, where you just see Ridley just outside of the screen. Yeah. And it's also a good moment, and I think that if your game is being compared to a Metroid game, that's probably not a bad thing.
Right.
In the atmosphere department.
Especially because there are parts of the game where it feels like it's never in a first-person perspective, it's always from a third-person perspective. Mm-hmm. But there are moments where you feel like you are the character, but then at the end of the game, he's speaking to you directly, in second person, saying, you did this, you guided me here, you showed me these things.
Not always.
Yeah. But my point...
I'm a lunatic ending, he does speak to you directly.
Right, but I just thought it was interesting. I like when games, kind of play with whether you recognize yourself as being the avatar in the game, or if you see it solely from, a third-person perspective, or, in this case... when they break the fourth wall and address you as being a part of the narrative that is not necessarily as the player character.
Right.
Games can get really obnoxious with fourth wall breaking, though. I don't think this one did, but I was worried about when he started referring to, you, the player, at the ending. I was like, how stupid is this going to get? Because I think that's a really lazy storytelling device.
Well,
this game did not fall into the pitfall, I don't think.
We didn't like the insanity ending, but not for that reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, that all makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
What other feelings do we have? Thoughts?
Final thoughts?
The end of the podcast.
This is we should cut this out if it makes me look stupid.
Right.
Okay.
We should absolutely keep it in if it makes him look stupid.
I guess this is an interesting question. As someone who listens to the podcast, I never know how much stuff you do cut out, because obviously I only hear the final product, but very frequently you're like, this isn't going in the podcast.
And it's on the podcast?
There. Yeah. So I probably doomed myself. But anyway, the water tower. Did we go there?
We did.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's when I went up the two ladders.
It's where your wallet is.
Okay.
It's where, and you look out over the edge and you say, oh, that's the exit to the sewers.
Yep.
If someone was up here, maybe they saw me.
It's right after you leave the sewer, there's a ladder up high that you have to
okay,
bring down.
I remember what part you're talking about now. For some reason that didn't click with me that's where we were, and maybe it's because of this. Tell me if you disagree. But it seems like the game really makes a big deal about the water tower. I mean, it drops more hints about that being a meaningful location than any other place in the game.
Yeah.
In the part with your computer, you have a website up about the water tower.
I was expecting to go into the postcards about the water tower. The water tower was on the maps.
I didn't feel like it figured into the plot very significantly. Maybe it was because of the ending we got.
I think it was because I think that the way that I read it with the water tower is that when you get to the top of the water tower, it says like, "Oh, I could see it." Like somebody could have seen me if they were up here. I think the implication, because you find your wallet up there, is that you were the one that was up there and you were watching people as they were coming through. And then I guess like
Doing
a
a murder.
drunken Batman, just like diving on top of people and stabbing them to
No,
death.
yeah, I was thinking that because he says he can see the house, and I was thinking like maybe that's how you ended up there, is that he was up there like spying on the people in the house before he decided to go in there and murder them.
Right. Also possible.
Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough.
So on that note, do we have final thoughts?
I guess I'll go first. So as we've been discussing, this game does have its flaws, and I think it's because it's more of like an experimental game, or at least it has that feel to me. It's shorter, made by one person, and strips out a lot of like conventional gameplay mechanics and things of that nature. But I really like this game. I think, like I've said, the buzzword on this episode is atmospheric. The game is very atmospheric, and it sets like a tone that I like. And if you hadn't already been doing this, I would probably be showing it to all my friends too, because it's so short and cheap. Mm-hmm. That I don't know. I think it is an experiment that works, and I think I'd like to see like what else the developer can do in another game, like using these ideas and what they've learned from it.
Yeah, I think that the uniqueness of the game is in and of itself like what makes this game worthwhile. The fact that it's something that took its idea and ran with it, and obviously it's a short game, and NOCLIP podcast as a whole loves when a game is short and doesn't take a lot of our time. But it also aids in that, like, I want to see more endings. I want to see how this person reacts to it. It's like a psychological test, like the Rorschach test for somebody.
I always really anticipating whether or not they're going to say they found Rachel in the basement,
right?
That kind of thing.
Are they going to set the rat free? They
yeah.
Let it sit
Oh
there?
yeah, that never played in again.
It never does.
Nope.
He said dejectedly.
I know. I'm sad.
If you set it free, I was hoping that it was. If you leave it in the trap, turns out the rat killed everybody.
The rat was Rachel.
Yeah. The rat. It was rat. Troll.
Rat race.
TM.
I'm gonna pass my turn on this. I'm done.
Yeah, I obviously I like this game too, but I don't know if it ever really delivers on the promise of maybe the first 15%.
Sure.
There are a lot of cool elements, but I don't know if it ever comes together to into something really great or spectacular. But considering it's the product of like one person, it's obviously still quite impressive, and I would also like to watch other people play it.
Right. I think the strength of the game is watching other people play it and seeing what choices they make and what endings they get. I'm not sure if I would replay it myself just for the sake of getting the other endings. I would probably be more likely to watch it on YouTube now that I know kind of how the plot goes and what experiences there are and are not present. So yeah, watching other people play it after your first playthrough, I think for me would be the more appealing thing, and it explains a lot of why Chad was showing it to everybody, because that's really where it is interesting to see what people notice and what choices they make.
It'd be cool if there was like one really buck wild ending.
Right.
Like if you set the rat free, then it turns out like there's a demon in your basement.
Right. It's like the dog ending of Silent Hill, where like some other entity was orchestrating the whole thing, and it's silly in some way.
Yeah.
That'd be pretty good. Thank you for joining us on NOCLIP Pocket.
What are we talking about next time?
Next time, we're going to be talking about Monument Valley for iOS and Android. So I think this is the first time we're going to talk about like a proper phone game.
Yeah, like so a game that is just a phone game.
Right. So join us for that. Until the next time, you can get a hold of us. All of our contact information is on noclippodcast.com or on splattershot.pro. That domain's going to run out soon, and I'm not sure if I'm going to renew it. So, get on that now. On there, you can find all of our old episodes. our YouTube channel, and a link to our Twitter at NOCLIP Podcast. And I've been mentioning this on the end of the episode, but I know Janelle doesn't listen. So Janelle, what have you been doing recently?
What have I been doing? Well, I took over your Twitter account. I've been sending out all those tweets. So hopefully if we get a little more traffic up on there, I would love to put out some Twitter polls, kind of engage the audience, maybe put out a couple options for upcoming pocket episodes or full-length episodes that people could choose from. Kind of have a little bit of say in the content that you put out. And I just want to say I don't listen to the podcast, largely because I hate hearing my own voice. So I will never listen to the ones that I'm on. But
Also hate Andy's voice.
Also hate Andy's voice. So really, I never listen to any of them.
That's fair.
Not a one. No. But yeah, so I would love to see some more engagement on the Twitter. You can hit me up there at NOCLIP Podcast, and I'm going to try to keep the internet folks in the loop with all of the NOCLIP goings on.
I like the sound of all voices because they keep the ones in my head out.
Can we plug the Twitter?
Well, this is where I would be ending the podcast.
But we didn't pick a game for next time.
Andy knows.
The choices are
next
sitting
time
up
we're
there.
playing Time Splitters Future Perfect.
You know you want a full episode of that.
That's true.